HIV testing and provision of antiretrovirals and all that, and other support in the health care space. And that amounts to, the biggest chunk of it is about $78 billion or so. And so we're going to make adjustments in the budget. Happily, when we have elections, we don't present the budget until the new government takes over. And so we're supposed to present the budget in March. So it's possible for us to make provision to cover what the shortfall in U.S. assistance is going to be. I believe that it's adversity and opportunity. It must teach Africa to become more self-reliant. This goes to help the most vulnerable in our society. And so in making those adjustments, we must learn how to take care of our vulnerable and make sure that they're able to be included in the growth that is taking place. I think that the U.S. played a very critical role in the post-world order. And that post-world order has benefited the whole globe, including the U.S. The U.S. has prospered from the post-World War order. But it's gotten to a stage where it wants to recalibrate, and it has a right to recalibrate. But I believe that the recalibration should be in a less disruptive manner than it is happening now. One of the things that the U.S. is going to lose is that soft power that it has wielded in the world. I mean, these are people who are grateful for the kind of assistance that they get. And so for U.S. to decide that, no, we don't want to have anything to do with it anymore, then they lose some of that soft power. But it means that there are many other partners. U.S. are not our only partners, and so we'll continue to collaborate with other countries. And that's why we have a multipolar world. We are no longer a unipolar world. And so as bridges are burning, new bridges are being formed. And we need to look for those new bridges and be able to link the world on those new bridges.
Well, that's an admirably clear-headed reaction to something very dramatic that I can't imagine you were expecting. I want to hone in on one bit of that before I broaden it, which is the impact on US soft power and the speed with which you build other connections. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, like I said, US is very well admired in a lot of the developing world, you know, for the kind of assistance that it gives, for its presence in many theaters. And so if it decides that it's withdrawing, I think that there are many other countries that can fill the gap. But aside from filling the gap, I think that it sends a signal to Africa that the time has come for us to be more self-reliant when it comes to issues to do, especially with the vulnerable in our society. We should roll out more safety nets. We must go for more equitable societies, bridge the gap between the rich and the poor, and put out opportunities for our young people to be able to make a life for themselves.
So that's an opportunity for you to reshape away from, I'm going to put it crudely, aid dependence to a much more self-started approach.
I think so.
Interesting. Celso Amorim, when you heard of the decision on USAID, you are a long-standing diplomat. First of all, how surprised were you? And secondly, what do you think the consequences will be of this very abrupt shift in direction?
Well, I don't know if I'm very experienced, but I'm really an old diplomat, and that keeps us from surprises. But I think the decisions that have been taken recently, the USAID, but also the tariffs imposed on other countries, are not very welcome. I think there is, in this very interesting book about multipolarization that was given by the organization, there is an interesting sentence. It says, in relation to developing countries, whether our preference is for the respecting of the rules, what do we really want? Respect of the rules or change of the rules? We want both. So that's the simple answer, which I would say. So we need to change some rules in order to make it more South-South cooperation. For instance, rules, not only those that are written, but the practices, more South-South cooperation, less money for armament, more money for food security, for climate. So this is the change of the rules. But while the changes, as long as the rules don't change, we want respect for the old rules because we adapted to those rules. For instance, Brazil was a strong supporter of the creation of UNCTAD, precisely because that the old GATT was a developed country, rich countries club. So, but and now these rules, which are more or less the same of the GATT with some adaptation in WTO, they have to be respected. So you have to have a place where you can send your disputes, where they can be judged fairly according to the rules, so that we avoid a trade war, which would be bad for everyone. So, in a summary, that's it.
Do you think we are on the path to a trade war? How is Brazil proposing to react to the imposition of tariffs?
Well, we try. It's always negotiation. I mean, of course, these, for instance, the particular case of Brazil, the first attack, so to say, onslaught, was on steel. Well, many of the industries in the United States depend on the steel they buy from Brazil, so they are our allies. So we're talking to them to see if we can come to some negotiation. Negotiation is always better. Go to the WTO and ask for the dispute settlement mechanism to solve. But unfortunately, the US, that was in the first Trump government, but in a way it was weakening before already. Doesn't work, so we have to think. Maybe we can coordinate with other countries that are hit in the same way.
So, Rebecca, this system seems to be under, I think it's more than just attack, actually. I don't have to be diplomatic like Wolfgang does. I mean, it seems to me that this old system is dead. And the world that UNCTAD was there to police has been radically shaken up and probably is not coming back. How do you then react to that?
Well, two reactions first. We were not happy with the system, but as Celso says, we wanted the rules to be respected because it's worse to not have a system than to have a system that you want to change. We have a system that we want to change, but not having a system is worse for everybody. So this is my first reaction. So there were things that needed to change, and I think that we have to recognize that part of the discontent comes from reality. People are not happy. So something has to change in terms of the global economy to be more inclusive. Now, let me just cool a little bit the funeral that you have proposed.
I'm provoking you to have a discussion.
And say that still today, 80% of trade is happening under rules, under the WTO rules or under the free trade or bilateral or regional agreements. 80% of trade is still there. And we have two things that have shaken the world in concrete terms. That is the steel tariff and the 10% tariff on China. The rest has not happened yet.
But it's been announced, right?
But we don't know if it's a negotiation, if there will be a negotiation or not. If there is a negotiation, we are in a different position. If there will be a unilateral imposition of the reciprocity that yesterday Trump announced as a study, that will really go to the heart of the system that we have today. Because reciprocity in the WTO is that you give the same treatment to everybody when you decide to give it to one country. And this is not the reciprocity we are hearing in the announcement of yesterday. So I think that in a way we have also to wait to see what will be the concrete, if it will be a negotiation with the countries within agreements, or if there will be a complete jeopardizing completely the main rule of the WTO.
Can I push you a little bit on, and you said that I used the funeral. Let's continue the funeral metaphor. Why I think it is a funeral. Even if this is a negotiating tactic, it is a president whose view is that it is America's right to use tariffs as a negotiating tactic unilaterally whenever it feels like it. I think that is a given now. whether or not he wants to move to a more tariff system-wide approach, the notion that the tariffs are a negotiating tactic unilaterally is not what the multilateral system is based on.
That's fair. But let me say that also trade has changed. What you are saying is true. We don't like it. It's not that I like it. So I prefer the second worst than the first worst. Because it will be different for the developing countries. It will be different for the world. But let me say that also the structure of trade has changed. 30% of trade today is South-South. 30%. Yes? 40% is North-South, South-North. Okay? And 30% is North-North. So there will be a 30% that will be very affected, but there is the South-South trade that has been the really growing part of trade in the last 2 decades. Yes? For the first time, South-South trade is so important. And if we think about the opportunities there, and I go to what the president said, the African Free Trade Area, for example, can add to the trade in Africa $3.4 trillion. Yes? And that depends on Africa. It doesn't depend on the US. You know, so the self-reliance of Africa is not only aid, it's also economic growth. You know, most of the population, young population, will be in Africa. They have a huge opportunity, and it will change the structure of the global economy. That's my point.
That's a really interesting point. And Mr. President, I'll turn to that because we spoke about it in the context of aid, and you mentioned it in trade. Let's talk about what this, and to use the phrase here, multipolarization, what is the new system that you would want to create, both for trade and aid, assuming that the US is doing what it's doing? What is everyone else going to need to do now?
Well, self-reliance is not only at the national level, but on the continental level. And there's good news coming out of Africa, like she said. Most countries have ratified the protocol on continental free trade in Africa. And that trade is beginning to grow steadily. We're able to export tariff-free into our countries. Of course, there are obstacles because our trade channels have been the colonial trade channels between us and Europe and not amongst ourselves. So one of the things we need to deal with first is how we develop the infrastructure to be able to exchange goods amongst ourselves. Already, most countries are allowing free movement of people. And so if we have free movement of goods and services across the continent, I think that it will fill a huge gap in South-South trade, and that will benefit all our countries.
And do you think that the actions of the Trump administration will accelerate Africans' determination to do this? Will it finally actually happen, the African Free Trade Area?
Definitely it will. Definitely we will learn to be more self-reliant as a continent.